Today's lesson is Brain Scan reveals flurry of activity before death. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're going to talk about what happens when we die. And of course, this is a topic not a lot of people want to talk about, but you may have seen shows on TV that talk about people about ready to die, and they may have had near-death experiences, and they talk about their life flashing before their eyes, and they may even say that they went to heaven and they saw God or Allah or Buddha or whatever. So again, we don't really know if this is true, if they're just making this up, but there seems to be some kind of scientific evidence to suggest that our brains are really active when we die.
Yes, it's not really a happy subject, but it's also quite interesting from a scientific point of view to study or to look into what happens in people's brains right before they die. Because up until now, we have only dealt with the subject in television shows and in anecdotes, what people have told about personal experiences or the experiences of people they know. But now there is actual scientific research into brain activity right before death.
Indeed. So we've got some evidence here. And of course, if you want to measure brain activity, you might have a brain scan, which we're going to be talking about today. And EEG will be specific about that in just a couple of seconds. But yeah, let's find out what this topic is all about. Let's introduce this topic by listening to the first part.
Brain scan reveals flurry of activity before death. We often hear that a person's life flashes before their eyes moments before death, a phenomenon widely reported to occur during near-death experiences and frequently depicted in fiction, films, and TV shows. Interestingly, a recent study provides empirical evidence that could support this claim.
大家好，第一部分我们看到动词 depict， 意思是描绘、描述或是刻画。例如 The documentary depicted its subject in a sympathetic way. 这部纪录片以同情的角度描绘其主角。或是 Jeremy's paintings depict images of his hometown. Jeremy 的画作描绘着自己家乡的样貌。另外，将这个字字尾加上 ion， 就变成了名词 depiction， 表示描绘或是描述。举例来说 Most of the artist's signature works are depictions of 19th century city life. 那个艺术家大部分的代表作品是描写19世纪的都市生活。
So the title of today's lesson is Brain Scan Reveals Flurry of Activity Before Death. Here, brain scan refers to a procedure, a medical procedure. Let's look first at the word scan. To scan something means to look at something carefully in the hopes of finding a particular thing. So from a non-medical standpoint, I could say that I scanned a room full of crowded people in order to find somebody. A machine can also scan a barcode to find out the details, the information of a product. Here, we're talking about scanning the brain. So when you do a brain scan in a hospital, you're using a machine to look carefully at the activity inside the brain. And such brain scans can be done in the form of CAT scan or an MRI scan.
Or an EEG, as we're going to find out here in just a couple of seconds. But this particular brain scan reveals a flurry of activity before death. And here we've got the word flurry, which is kind of an interesting word if you've ever been to Mickey D's or Mac's or McDonald's or whatever. They've got this special ice cream treat that you can buy called a flurry. And, of course, that's based on a blizzard, a snowstorm. Of course, where I'm from, of course, it snows a lot in the winter. And sometimes the weather forecast will include flurries. Yes, we'll have flurries this afternoon. That just means there's snow falling, but it's kind of blowing around rapidly. It's not really a blizzard just yet, but you've got lots of snow falling. Or maybe not really that much snow, but some snow, but it's blowing around and there's a lot of wind. So if you have a flurry of activity here, that means there is a lot of activity. There are things going all over the place in different directions. So indeed, in the brain of a dying person, you'll see lots of brain activity. You'll see a flurry of activity.
That's right. And the first sentence of the lesson goes right into this phenomenon. It says here, we often hear that a person's life flashes before their eyes moments before death, a phenomenon widely reported to occur during near-death experiences and frequently depicted in fiction, films, and TV shows. In other words, we often hear stories, people telling about their experiences of their life flashing before their eyes right before they're about to die. So, of course, we're talking about people who finally did not die. Maybe they were in an accident or they were very sick and they were resuscitated. They came back to life and were able to tell about their experiences right before they were going to die. And this experience often includes their life flashing before their eyes, meaning they see a lot of things from their past that go right in front of their eyes like images in succession at the moment right before they're supposed to die.
All of their significant life experiences are suddenly thrust into their memory, or at least they can remember them. They come out of memory, basically, and they can see them before their very eyes. Your first birthday party, when you got your first bicycle, when you graduated from high school, when you met your girlfriend, when you got married, when you traveled to Europe, etc. Those will all flash before your eyes before you die. And, of course, we've got other kinds of near-death experiences as well. I think they often talk about that bright light that you see that you're going toward, and it doesn't hurt to look at it, and you see God and stuff like that. So, of course, they're often depicted in fiction, films, and TV shows. So here we've got the verb to depict, which means they're kind of described or they're represented or they're shown to us in various ways. You could see paintings, for example, that might depict a scene in a forest, for example. Maybe a deer jumping through the forest or something. The painting depicts a deer running through the forest. But in this particular case, these accounts by people, they depict scenes from near-death experiences. Yes, their life flashing before their eyes or other things.
Yes, and up until recently, we've only seen these things depicted in fiction, films, and TV shows. But interestingly, a recent study provides empirical evidence that could support this claim. So a recent study provides evidence, and this evidence is empirical. Empirical means based on real experience or scientific experiments, rather than theory or rather than just simply the stories that people tell. So a recent study provides empirical evidence that could support this claim. So the claim, of course, is that right before someone is about to die, they see their lives flashing before their eyes.
The other evidence we've had up to now has all been anecdotal. People tell us these things, and of course we want to believe them. We think, well, yeah, we believe you believe what you saw, but we don't actually have any solid evidence. We don't have any empirical evidence that you really did have your whole life flash before your eyes, or that you met Jesus in the Garden of Eden or something like that. We just have to take your word for it. But now we've got this empirical evidence. Let's find out what this is all about. Let's read the next part of our lesson, and then we'll come back to discuss it.
In 2016, technicians at Vancouver General Hospital were performing an electroencephalogram, EEG, on an 87-year-old man with epilepsy when the patient died unexpectedly from a heart attack. The team noticed a surge of brain activity 30 seconds before and after the man's heart stopped. Significantly, the brain waves they observed were the same type as those generated during activities such as dreaming, memory recall, and meditation. The observation led the authors of the study, which was published earlier this year, to speculate that the man could have been replaying memories from his life.
第二部分我们看到单字 surge， 这个字是名词，指激增、急剧上升、汹涌或是奔腾。像是 All of the department stores noticed a surge in buying around the end of the year. 所有的百货公司注意到年末的时候，购买率会急速上升。或者 There is always a surge of customers at the restaurant right around noon. 在中午时段，这家餐厅总是会有一大批客人。另外 surge 也可以做动词使用，指激增或是飞涨。举例来说，The city has been locked down after new virus cases surged. 新病毒的病例激增后，该市已经封城。或是 Sales have surged because of the viral ad campaign. 由于这波疯传的广告活动，销量急剧增加。再来，我们看到名词 meditation， 指沉思、冥想或是打坐。例如 Many people use meditation as a means of reducing stress. 许多人将冥想作为减轻压力的一个方法。或是 Many athletes practice meditation, which helps them focus on their goals. 许多运动员练习打坐，来帮助他们专注于他们的目标。另外补充这个字的动词 meditate, M-E-D-I-T-A-T-E, meditate, 意思是冥想或是沉思。像是 Julie often meditates to relax. Julie 常借由冥想来放松。或是 Our manager meditated on the problem for a long time. 我们的主管为这项问题沉思了好长一段时间。
So now let's look more in detail at the empirical evidence that was mentioned before. In 2016, technicians at Vancouver General Hospital were performing an electroencephalogram, or EEG, on an 87-year-old man with epilepsy when the patient died unexpectedly from a heart attack.
Okay, so again, we're in Vancouver. And we've got some technicians there. Of course, in hospitals, you've got various people who are trained to take care of patients. You've got doctors, nurses, etc. And you've got technicians who specialize in using these machines here. They use a special machine to conduct electroencephalograms. And we had this patient who had epilepsy, which is when you have seizures and stuff like that, and there's some kind of electric problem in your brain. And this man was 87 years old, and they were performing an EEG on this man to figure out what was going on in his brain in regard to epilepsy. But then he actually died unexpectedly from a heart attack. So while he was having this electroencephalogram, he actually had a heart attack, which means you have a problem with your heart. It gives out, it doesn't beat correctly, and it can kill you. And that's what happened to this man. He actually died during an EEG. What a coincidence.
Right, and the team noticed a surge of brain activity 30 seconds before and after the man's heart stopped. And because they were performing an EEG on this man and were able to see images of this man's brain activity, they realized that right before he died, 30 seconds before he died, that his brain was highly active.
So a surge is just a sudden increase in something. There might be a surge of electricity. That's why we often plug our computers into those electric strips there. So if there's a surge in electricity from the current from the wall, it won't destroy our computers. It will just burn the fuse on that electric strip there. So that's a good idea to do that. Don't plug your computer directly into the wall. So watch out for those electric surges. And here, of course, there was a surge of activity before and after the man died. And significantly, the brain waves they observed were the same type as those generated during activities such as dreaming, memory recall, and meditation. So, of course, the brain produces all sorts of brain waves or brain activity. and they're all uniquely characteristic. So you produce different kinds of brain waves when you dream, when you recall memories, and when you meditate. You might meditate if you're a Buddhist, for example, where you've been taught to sit still in a certain position and try to empty your mind of all thought or focus on a mantra or something like that. So indeed, your mind produces those kinds of brain waves. And here the brain waves were very similar to the brain waves that are produced when we dream, when we remember things, and when we meditate.
Yes, and the word recall here is being used as a noun, in which case you would put the stress on the first syllable. If you were to use the word as a verb, then you would say recall. And recall, the noun, means the ability to remember something.
Indeed, so the observation of that EEG led the authors of the study, which was published earlier this year, to speculate or to guess, basically, that the man could have been replaying memories from his life. They don't really know because the man died, and as they say, dead men tell no tales. So they could only speculate or guess that he was probably recalling past memories. His life was flashing before his eyes. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's now listen to the third part.
While many scientists are reluctant to use increased brain activity to draw conclusions about the subjective experience of death, Dr. Ajmal Zamar, who is the senior author of the study, believes that the evidence is compelling. Something we may learn from this research is that although our loved ones have their eyes closed and are ready to leave us to rest, their brains may be replaying some of the nicest moments they experienced in their lives, he said.
最后第三部分，我们看到形容词 compelling， 表示很有说服力的，令人信服的。例如 Benjamin made several compelling points during the debate. Benjamin 在辩论会中提出多项很有说服力的论点。或是 Danny made a compelling argument for reducing costs. Danny 针对缩减成本提出了一个令人信服的论点。
While many scientists are reluctant to use increased brain activity to draw conclusions about the subjective experience of death, Dr. Ajmal Zamar, who was the senior author of the study, believes that the evidence is compelling. So, in other words, a lot of scientists are reluctant, which means they're not completely willing to use brain activity as a way to talk about or discover more about the experience of death. This particular doctor believes that using this kind of evidence is compelling, or this type of evidence is compelling. So going back to the beginning of this sentence, we have the phrase to draw conclusions. When you draw conclusions, you are deciding what to believe about something after you have thought about all of the facts. So a lot of scientists don't really want to use increased brain activity as a way to draw conclusions about the experience of death, because the experience of death is subjective. And the word subjective here means that something is based on your own feelings and ideas and not on facts.
Yep, they weren't able to actually talk to this man to see if he was actually seeing things, if he was actually having a near-death experience or remembering things from his childhood. So they were just guessing, they were speculating there. So, of course, scientists are reluctant to agree with those conclusions because it is subjective. And, of course, the opposite to subjective is objective. And yeah, this is very subjective. Of course, a lot of people have different opinions about near-death experiences. But Dr. Zamar, who was the senior author of the study, believes that the evidence is compelling. And Dr. Zamar went on to say, something we may learn from this research is that although our loved ones have their eyes closed and are ready to leave us to rest, their brains may be replaying some of the nicest moments they experienced in their lives. So, indeed, he's kind of speculating here. I guess we could learn from this research. And we do know that our loved ones will close their eyes and they'll leave us to rest. They will pass away. They will move on to the next world. And their brains may be replaying those nice moments when they were alive. And of course, we all have happy memories. Some of us not so much, maybe. We had unhappy childhoods or something like that. It's very possible, but still, we might have nice moments in life that we will recall when we're about to pass away. It is very compelling indeed.
That's right. We may not know for sure ever whether this is true or not, whether people have their lives flash before their eyes right before death. But the idea is a comforting one that we can see all of the good things in our lives right before we leave this earth.
And it is an interesting topic to discuss amongst yourselves. Do you know anybody who's had a near-death experience? What did they tell you? Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. It's time now to listen to our dear Chinese teacher, Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分最后一句提到，这个观察结果使这项研究的作者们推测，男子可能正在重放他这一生的回忆。文中用到句型 lead somebody to 加原形动词，是表达使得让某人做某事。还有一个句型是 lead to somebody 加上动词 ing， 也可以表达使某人做某事，导致或者是引发某人做某事。举例来说， Her passion for helping people in need led her to become a social worker. 也可以说 Her passion for helping people in need led to her becoming a social worker. 她那一份想要帮助有需要的人的那种热忱呢，使她成为一位社工。好，那这边也顺便复习 lead to 的用法。Lead to 表示造成、导致，那后面可以接名词或动名词，意思就跟 give rise to 或是 result in 或是 bring about 或是 cause 等等差不多。例如 Poor eating habits may lead to obesity. 不良的饮食习惯可能会导致肥胖。另外，文中写到 The man could have been replaying memories from his life. 情态助动词 could 它是可以用来表达推测，表示可能、或许。那我们用 could have been 加上动词 ing 是表达说对过去正在发生的事进行推测。那如果是 could have 加上过去分词 pp 则是表达对过去情况的推测，表示说过去可能做了某事。例如 Don't worry, she could have just forgotten to call you back. 别担心，她可能只是忘了回你电话。那这个句型呢，也可以表达出当时原本可以怎么样，或是可能怎么样，但是却没有做或没有完成的那种语义。像是 The accident could have been avoided. 那场意外原本可以避免的，但是却没有，这个意外还是发生了。我们再造一个例句。Amanda could have been a professional dancer, but her parents wouldn't let her. Amanda 原本有可能成为一名专业舞者，但她父母不允许。好，那最后补充一下，其他助动词像是 should、would 或者是 might 也都有类似的用法，在后面接完成式，可以表达出原本应该怎么样，原本会怎么样，或是原本或许怎么样。例如 You should have gone to bed earlier last night. 你昨晚应该要早点上床睡觉的。那这意味着你昨晚并没有早点睡，当时原本应该这么做，可是你却没这么做。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Depict. This painting depicts a group of women dancing in a circle. Technician. Sue works as a technician in a doctor's clinic. Surge. Increasing fuel costs caused a surge of interest in electric vehicles. Recall. At 75 years old, my grandfather still has amazing powers of recall. Subjective. Our experience of reality is highly subjective. Compelling. The politician made a compelling argument for government reform.
Discussion starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, do you think the study mentioned in the article provides compelling evidence that a person's life flashes before their eyes moments before death? Why or why not?
I'm not convinced by the evidence since the evidence is only based on brain scans, so we still don't know what the person who was about to die was experiencing.
Indeed, I think the evidence is compelling because it does seem to be the first time that someone died during an EEG, and hopefully in the future there will be more people dying during EEGs. Of course, I don't want them to die, of course, but I hope that if they do have to die, that they will be having a brain scan at the same time. Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.